Hey everyone, it's Kristie again, and today we are talking about one of my favorite things, but it's one of the things that keeps me up at night, that is all about personalized professional development. Because it would be much easier if I didn't care and I could just go in and do my lecture, if I was teaching a course, if I could just do my coaching session, if I could just do a day of PD and not care about the learners, right? But I really want people to get to a change in practice. And so today I thought I'd talk a little bit about the challenges that we face in personalizing professional development, and then give you a bit of suggestions and some tips and some things, knowing that I have not got this figured out. I think about it a lot, but let me tell you, we've been working on this since about 2011. I think we first started to call it out and say, wow, tiered instruction for children is kind of like tiered instruction for adults. But what would that look like? What would I do for an embedded learning opportunity during a course or during a professional development event? So some fellow revolutionaries, Pam Elwood, Melanie Reese, Lydia Moore, and Jennifer Champagne, really started digging into this in around 2010, 2011, 2012. And so this work that I'm going to share with you but today really comes from a larger body of work where we were really studying tiered or personalized PD. So just a really quick note for those of you who are listening or are joining me live, and if you are an ECE Solutionary member, there's lots of stuff already posted in the show notes for today in your members only library. And a few more things I'll post when I have a minute after the broadcast. So just a quick note for ECE Solutionary members. If you're not yet a member and you're interested, just go to prekteachandplay.com/learn-more, and you can learn more about being a member. Anyway, so there's lots of good stuff there in terms of like the background, the references, the research that we did. But really, when it comes to personalized PD, if you think of it just like we would think about tiered instruction for kids, it's part of the solution, but it's also then part of the quandary because we don't yet have tiered instruction figured out for kids, right? I would argue we don't yet have it figured out. So let me tell you how complex it is. You already know it. But then I'm going to give you the number one tip and where you start. And for some of you who know me, aren't going to be at all surprised by my tip because it's the same thing. I'll just steal my own thunder. It's what's your what. If you don't know what your what is, there's no way you can personalize professional development. So let's just talk about it, get all of the elephants in the room, named and settled. And so we're trying to address the hearts, minds, and bodies of adult learners, right? We've been talking about that on Manifesto Mondays. And so we've been thinking about how do I really address their heart, their mind, their soul, right? The whole learner. Same with kids, right? This is a total parallel. Whether you're talking about a 3-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 5-year-old, or a 50-year-old, there's these parallels in terms of the learning process. So we want to address the wholeness of the person. Then we want to have this match, right? So when we talk about embedding, we always talk about creating a match. So we want to be matched in our pace and our timing and our delivery and the what with the how. And it's this beautiful little coin that goes perfectly together. And that is where we get great learning because we have just the right of excitement, just the right of novelty, just the right amount of support, right? Some call it the Goldilocks. It's not too big, not too small, it's just right. But what do I do when I have 100 of you in front of me? How do I make Goldilocks appear and make a porridge that is just right when somebody wants it spicy? Somebody's like, that's too spicy. Same thing when we're in a classroom of kids. You've got 25 of them in front of you. One wants to be eating the carpet. One wants to be being the teacher. One could care less about the carpet or the teacher. See, these are these parallel tracks. And so we're trying to create these lovely matches, but we're one person and they are hashtag too many, right? So we've got the wholeness for each learner. We've got lots of learners that we're trying to create a match for. And then we want to be able to have this perfect synergy between these evidence-based practices. So we go around all the time and we talk about, even in our Fun Fact Friday, about professional learning communities, or should I do coaching, or should I do a sit and get, should we do a make and take, should I do a pair and share, should I do 3 hours, 5 hours, should I do it online, on ground, right? We get so caught up in the how that we forgot the magic, which is what's your what. So we can get caught up We can admire all of these things we want. We want matches of timing. We want matches of materials, right? So just the right things to support the learner in just the right time. And so some of you, again, for that are ECE Solutionary members, you can get my Symbaloo, or on my blog, I'll post it on the Summertime Solutions, that particular blog, you can get my Symbaloo, right? There's all these web mix tiles, and tile after tile after tile is a link to an evidence-based practice, how to do podcasts, how to do Twitter, how to do coaching, how to do a professional learning community, right? We can get so caught up in the methods, in the how that we are going to personalize professional development, that we completely lose sight of the what. And so again, this is the same parallels working with young children. Yes, whole child, whole learner. Want to create matches, right? We want to embed these learning opportunities at just the right time, with just the right amount of scaffolding, with just the right amount of materials. But we're only one person. And if I get too caught up, like on Pinterest, like I can go crazy on Pinterest with all the newest things that people are doing for adult learners. And I'll be like, oh, I'll make that. We'll make a chart. We'll do this activity. I can get caught up so much in the how that I forget what's my what. So that's going to be our big tip for the end of the day. The last part, just as a quick reminder, when we think about embedded learning opportunities, it's not, they're not like happening next to each other. They're happening concurrently. So if I've got a large group, even if I've got a small team, if I've got somebody more than myself, I've got this porridge that's not going to be right for somebody. So whether you have 3 people you're trying to get kind of corralled, 30 people, or 300, you've got this issue of not everybody's at the same place in the same time. But just like with embedding of instruction for children, it's simultaneous. So there's a constant flow of teaching common outcomes. There are additional dosages for targeted outcomes, and then there are even more personalized for those individualized outcomes. But we can't know how much of each of those, or when to deliver the additional for the targeted, or when to be more personalized for the individualized outcomes, if we don't know what our what is. So again, Solutionary members, I've put lots of readings up there for you, and I'll put a few more after the live broadcast in terms of Fink's work and stuff as the blended practices stuff, the Symbaloo, everything that'll kind of bring this together so that you can get the parallel. But if you know or study about embedded learning opportunities, if you've done much around our work in blended practices where we talk about common outcomes, or these sort of common things that everybody needs to learn, and then these targeted outcomes where somebody's struggling or somebody has stalled, and then these individualized outcomes that are much more about an individual person at just the right time. So when we plan professional development, we need to think about it both simultaneously as well as sequential, meaning in that moment, right, in that staff meeting, in that Friday gathering, in that coaching session, in that day-long event, we got to give instruction towards the common outcomes, the targeted outcomes, and the individualized outcomes all at the same time. Just like if I'm reading a story at story time in Circle, I've got to be teaching young children common outcomes, targeted outcomes, and maybe their IEP goals all at the same time. It's not like I can always pull people and give you just this dosage and this and then that. But the kicker is that messy middle. So we get pretty good at individualizing, right? If I'm in a one-on-one session, I can so make sure your porridge is perfect. And I'm getting better in a large group, kind of moving it along in a way that feels like, oh, I can take it, the porridge is a little bit hot, but I don't mind it, right? So those two ends, we're getting pretty good at, both in our instruction of children and in working with groups, right? I can either kind of move the whole group along, or I can do really individualized stuff. But what about that messy middle? And that messy middle is the same as it is for young children. It's the place that none of us want to be, but all learners are there at some point. So what is the messy middle? The messy middle is when learners, their learning has stalled or they're struggling. So it's on us to recognize where might there be a time where they've stalled, and or what is the sign that they are struggling. And sometimes when we're back to that thing we talked about earlier during Summertime Solutions of that resistance, That resistance is a suggestion that somebody is struggling. And so instead of being like, what is wrong with you? Can't you just drink my Kool-Aid and be better? Have a little bit of compassion and recognize that this learner is struggling. Maybe something I'll never be able to know or understand, but it's on me to figure out how to jumpstart. So all of this said, that comes to the little handout that I shared on the sentence starters. And that is always going back to what's your what. So a group in Colorado, Heidi and Marcia and I, we lived this last year and we're living it still. Every single time we had an event, whether it was a webinar, a face-to-face, a coaching session, some of you participated in those events, we always asked each other, before we go and decide it's a webinar, before we decide how long should the webinar be, how much content should we do, some sort of activity, should we show a video, before we ever got to our how, we always made each other answer, what's your what? And that's not easy because we all want to jump to the how. 75 minutes. I'll flow it with a little temperature check, then I'll do a little PowerPoint, then we'll do a pair and share, right? That's easy. I can think of the how, but am I creating a match with the what? So if you think about what's your what, you need to think about it in a couple of ways. A, you have one maybe, is the common outcomes. What does everybody need to learn? Then you can think about how often do I teach that? Where do I teach that? What materials do I need? And what methods are evidence-based? Just like we would do an intentional instructional sequence with young children, right? The what, the when, the where, the with what, and the how. So, right? All of our Power Pack stuff. So you decide on, this is a common outcome. When should I teach it? Where should I teach it? With what? And then how, right? But the how is the last thing. But that's not where we end. Then we say, okay, when I know a group is struggling or needs more support, right? Additional learning opportunities, additional dosages, how am I going to have opportunities to teach targeted outcomes? So then I have to define those targeted outcomes. I don't just teach the first one louder or more often. How many of you have done the same thing over and over? You never feel like you get to the next topic because you're always coming back and revisiting the foundations. The foundations are there, but at some point you have to add on to that. So just like with young children, we don't just teach louder in the hallway. We don't just say, well, we'll give you another dosage on Friday. We need to embed simultaneously, while I'm teaching the common outcome for everyone, extra dosages, right? Simultaneously, extra dosages for those who may struggle or whose development has stalled or the resistance has come to see us, right? And then on top of that, I need to have planned instruction for the individualized outcomes. Now we should all feel a great deal of sympathy for all of the teachers that we support and or those of you who teach every day who we're asking them meet every child's need at every moment with no planning time. So we in professional development have the same challenge. How do I teach common outcomes, targeted outcomes, and individualized outcomes simultaneously? And then the sequential is because the targeted and individualized are going to need extra dosages, I got to go beyond just this one event or this one learning opportunity. But that requires assessment, right? We need to know what is your what. So last little piece of help and support, if I haven't bogged you down and said, oh, this might be too hard, I need to rethink my profession, right? Is just remember that it's just the same parallels we teach with young children. We're going to think about the 5 pieces, the what, the when, the where, the with what, and the how. We're not going to get sucked up into the how too quickly, right? So don't keep looking on Pinterest. Don't keep searching on our Facebook for more hows until you know what's your what. So in the handout for today, the sentence starters are from Fink's work on significant learning outcomes. And for you members, ECE Solutionary members, I'll put the Fink chapter on your show notes today that will tell you more about his work. But these are a way to think about what is my outcome. And his argument, I always use the analogy of Trivial Pursuit. So imagine you have a Trivial Pursuit game piece, right? Your little pie. And to win, you need a slice of each piece of the pie. And you can't have like all green. I don't remember what green is. Maybe like science. And let's say you're really good at science. You cannot win at Trivial Pursuit by getting all green pieces in your pie, right? You have to have a pink one. You have to have a blue one. You have to have a yellow one. You have to have an orange one. And that's why you're like, oh, I hope somebody on my team knows something about sports because, or sewing or whatever it might be, right? You're hoping because otherwise you can't get your pie piece filled. Well, it's the same thing with learning outcomes, these significant outcomes, these what? So whether it's a common outcome, a targeted outcome, or an individualized outcome, you need to know what it is before you can ever personalize PD. And so the think work helps you really think through, am I trying to teach something foundational? Am I trying to teach something that's application? And there are some in there that you'll be really interested to see that are more about the human, more about learning to learn. So if I want people to engage in a community, have I given them the skills about how to form relationships? That should be an outcome of my professional development. If they're going to need skills to be able to communicate with each other on Pinterest, do people know how to create a Pinterest account? Have I given time in the professional development to learning how to learn in the place where I'm going to deliver it? So instead of just glossing over the relationships and glossing over these kind of background things like getting your account set up, that might need to become one of my outcomes. Once it's one of my outcomes, I can go, wow, a group of my people might have gotten stuck because we're using technology. And if I would create an opportunity to get them unstuck, now they're ready and more receptive to the information, the common outcomes that I'm going to be teaching and so forth. So the idea is that you need to know what before how. Your what needs to be common, targeted, and individualized, just like with young children. It's got to be tiered. It has to be simultaneous so that we have to learn how to deliver dosages of common outcomes, targeted outcomes, and individualized outcomes simultaneously, right? Embedded in the same activity or event. And then you have to know what's the what. What is your common outcome? What is your targeted outcome for those who've stalled or learning, they're struggling? And then what's a personalized outcome? And so hopefully those sentence starters will be a little bit helpful. I use the example of assessment so that I've given you an example of most, if not all, of Think's types of questions, outcomes that you can target. And I've given you an example of what that outcome. Now, whether you write these on a syllabus or on your first PowerPoint slide, doesn't matter. This is all about lesson planning, that you need to be clear on what's your what. And the next time somebody says, I think we should do a professional learning community, your question is, well, why? What is our what? If somebody says, I think we need coaching, what's your what? If somebody says, we should do a day-long conference, what's your what, right? So the how will always find its way once you know what's your what. So hopefully that's helpful. Again, ECE Solutionary members, go to your show notes for today. I'll post a few more things on Think and on blended practices for you to read. If you're not a member, you can go to prekteachandplay.com/learn-more, and then you have the sentence starters. And so if you try them out for your next professional development, whether that's one-on-one coaching as an itinerant teacher to a gen ed teacher, whether that's a teacher leader who's trying to get people to drink her Kool-Aid, whether that's an occupational therapist who's trying to deliver a good therapy for a kid, and the adults are like, I don't know if I can do that. You come and you put your hands on them. What's your what? So thank you for joining me. If you're listening back live and you have any questions, listening back recorded for the live, just post any questions you have to our Facebook, and then just have a fabulous weekend.